2:30 and we have a packed hour. So grateful to all of you who are here in the room and to folks who have signed online to watch us virtually. I'm Naina Gupta. I'm the Associate Director of Policy at the National Immigrant Justice Center. We are a Chicago-based national organization that advocates on behalf of immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers, but I'm in Washington, D.C., where I fight for immigrants on Capitol Hill. I'm thrilled to welcome you all today to our Chance to Come Home panel. It will be a powerful hour. I have 4 leaders and visionaries with me here today, and I'm so excited that they are joining us. Congressman Chuy Garcia, who represents Illinois' 4th Congressional District, award-winning filmmaker Alex Rivera, deported U.S. veteran and leader of the Deported Veterans Movement, Hector Barajas, and Shanat Sobrevilla, organizer and Chicago leader with Organized Communities Against Deportation. Just last month at NIJC, we launched a national campaign that calls on the Biden administration to set up a central process to help unjustly deported immigrants make a case to return to the U.S. to reunite with their loved ones. We are making this call alongside 10 deported advocates who are living in exile. Each of them are advocates in their own right, and they have courageously and powerfully shared their stories with their world. You can see their photos up here from left to right, top to bottom. Vanessa, Gora, Tina, Carlos, Samuel, Asia, Juan Carlos, Paul, Lionel, and Ibrahima. You can learn about them and hear their stories and their words on our website that you see right there. These 10 people represent the thousands of people who have been deported and separated from their loved ones and decades of life in the U.S. They are military veterans, small business owners, fathers, mothers, community leaders. Many of them were targeted in unjust ways under the prior administration and ones before them, and many actually have strong legal claims to immigration relief but still can't find a way to come home. Our NIJC campaign amplifies a policy proposal that was encompassed in a white paper that we released in 2021 that actually spells out for the Biden administration how they can set up a process like this using existing laws and procedures so that we can start bringing some of these people home. Since our paper's release, we have had some small but incredibly meaningful wins on the policy front. We've been able to bring home 6 of the people featured in our original paper. We've garnered national press and attention, including just a few weeks ago, support from over 64 members of Congress. But to truly understand the power of Chance to Come Home, which is about family unity, due process, and racial justice, I'm super excited to play for you a short film co-produced by NIJC and Alex Rivera, who's joining us here today, that tells the story of 2 immigrants, Howard and Vanessa, both fighting for a chance to come home.
My name is Howard Bailey.
My name is Vanessa Vaquis Mendoza.
I was originally from Jamaica. I was 15 years old when I came to New York.
I was born in El Salvador, and I left when I was 9 years old to the United States.
I signed up for the military. I got married. I started a family. And I started my trucking business. Things finally was looking up.
When I was 16, I got pregnant. My oldest son, Jason, he had Pompe disease, rare disease, didn't have no cure.
Get out there, Jason!
He used to be like, Mom, stop screaming so much because you embarrass me.
In 1995, I just got out of the military then, fresh, not even 6 months. And I get arrested for marijuana. My lawyer told me I had to plead guilty because it's Virginia Beach, I'm black, and I'm Jamaican. I didn't think that in 2010 that the marijuana conviction that happened 14 years ago would have came back and haunt me. About 5:30 in the morning, I heard a big knock on the door. Boom, 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 boom. And I opened the door. And then it was like, Howard Bailey? I was like, yes, sir, that's me. Did you apply for citizenship like 6 months ago? I'm like, yeah. And it was like, turn around, that's why we're here. I'm like, what? And they just grabbed me, man. And they just put the cuffs on me. And I was like, what's going on? He was like, yeah, you're getting deported. And my daughter came down and saw me in the handcuffs. She was crying and screaming and asking why they taking him. My daughter lost me. My wife lost me. My son lost me. I was separated from everyone that I love.
It was a day before Jason's birthday. I wanted to do him a little party. I went to the store with a friend of mine. She was like, oh, let's just take it.
A group of migrant women is coming forward with claims that they were the victims of unwanted and unnecessary medical procedures at a federal detention center in Georgia.
Surgeries were performed on several detainees without them fully understanding what was happening.
As a female, it feels like somebody just run you over and left you destroyed. That's how it feels, because it's something that they did to you and you have no idea. After surgery, I was bleeding every day. I was not getting no answers. I told my dad, I'm gonna sign the deportation. At least in Salvador, I can find a doctor that's going to help me and find out what's going on.
I was in Jamaica. Oh, man. I didn't know what to do.
Good afternoon. I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Senate Judiciary Subcommittee on Immigration, Citizenship, and Border Safety. We'll now turn to Mr. Bailey, who's participating virtually. Mr. Bailey, please proceed with your testimony.
I have now been living in exile for 8 years. 10 years if I include the 2 I spent in immigration jail fighting my case. The last time I saw my home was 10 years ago. And since then, life feels like a total nightmare. Every day I hope that I would wake up and just be back home in Virginia again.
And I remember going to the bathroom and looking in that mirror. I don't know who I was looking at.
I'm just asking for a chance to come home to the country I love, the country I serve. Stay safe and America.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey, thank you.
When I come back to El Salvador, I was like, Dad, I'm not gonna make it. Like, my God, what am I doing here?
When my mom got deported, it changed a lot in my life. My mom was responsible for my medicine, taking me to the doctor. I was just lost. I was like 15, 16 years old, lost. Everything went downhill.
I remember where I was at. I was in the country. The signal, the phone signal was not even working that good. They told me that ICE looked over your case and they decided to overturn your immigration case. Oh my God, man.
Mr. Bailey fought for our country, and I'm happy to fight for him.
saw Brandon. When I left here, Brandon was this high. I'm back in the trucking business. Everything start coming right back. It still feel good to be out there. You get your mind free. You focus on the road. Like therapy to me, I feel I needed this.
It's hard because I'm not there. I gotta hear him through the phone. I gotta see him, like his voice. He doesn't sound like my baby no more. He sounds like a man now. It's hard that I'm missing those special moments that I should be there. I hope that I do get a chance to go back and spend as much as time I can with my kids, to be there with them, to see them grow up and do things right.
We're gonna have to wait to see what happens in court.
We're gonna have to wait to see what happens. Hopefully everything goes good.
I'll be back there soon.
All right. Thank you for watching with us. You know, when I first met Howard over 2 years ago by video phone, he was stuck in Jamaica, and he told me by phone that he questioned his life and whether it was still worth living because he had lost everything. And when I put the phone down that night, I thought about my own family, own immigrant family, and my own father in Virginia, and what it might have felt like to watch him dragged on our front lawn, only to lose him forever. But I also asked what many people have asked us at NIJC since Howard bravely shared his story with the world, which is why is a guy who served in our military, owned a home with a VA loan, was a loving father to 2 children, owned his own business, deported for a single marijuana offense from decades before? And why was it that even with 3 United States senators and a Supreme Court decision on his side, that it took 10 years to bring him home? And what did that mean for the dozens of others who, like Howard, had been unjustly deported but had more complex cases or were not veterans like him? With that in mind, I want to turn to the Honorable Chuy Garcia, who we're so thrilled to have us joining us here today. Congressman Garcia is a prominent figure in American politics. He represents this state's 4th congressional district. He was born in Mexico and immigrated to Chicago with his family at a young age. Congressman, you've been a tireless advocate for the immigrant community, and you are supporting this ask that we give deported people at least a fair shot to make a case to reunite with their loved ones. You're also leading a bill that we will talk about later that offers a blueprint for how we can prevent deportations like this in the first place. But I just wanted to ask first why it has been important to you as a member of Congress to champion an ask like this, like Chance to Come Home, and those who are living in exile who've been unjustly deported.
Thank you. Hello. There we go. Thank you so much for the opportunity to participate with the wonderful people on this panel for a most worthy cause. So given that my father was a bracero, part of the worker exchange program with Mexico, later an undocumented immigrant. And as someone who came to this country, had the good fortune to, after my father got his green card, to become a permanent resident. I came here with my mother and 3 siblings in 1965. And now that I reflect on it, we had it pretty good. We had support when we arrived. We had family here where we could stay to begin to lay down roots. There was a supportive community, and I'm very grateful for that. And over a period of almost 5 decades now, I've gotten to see a broken immigration system become more insensitive, more punitive, more harsh, and denying people the opportunity to be with family, ripped away from family and from community. And that's what's motivated me to become a community organizer, a legislator at various levels of government, and to have the opportunity to contribute my little grain of sand toward a movement that seeks to change our immigration laws, of course. And among the experiences that I had was being in the administration of Chicago's first progressive reform and African-American mayor that in 1985 issued the first executive order making Chicago the first sanctuary or welcoming or sanctuary city in the country, and reaffirming that through actions. So when I became a Cook County Commissioner after serving in the Chicago City Council, I had the opportunity and the privilege to show that we can make a difference if we are intent upon doing that. And I introduced the first ordinance of its kind in the country that prohibited ICE collaboration with the Cook County government. Before that, the county government had been complicit, and the city government as well, in turning people over who are being released from Cook County Jail to ICE, and many of them were deported or placed under deportation proceedings. That's what's known in the U.S. Constitution as double jeopardy, and we were complicit in that practice. I was very happy when we passed the ordinance at being threatened by high-ranking U.S. officials in government that there would be consequences for the county, that we were doing the wrong thing and setting a bad example. My reply was, we'll see you in court. Show us that we're violating the law, that we're violating the Constitution, then we'll talk, but until then, we'll see you in court. Well, guess what? Court never happened because we stood up for the Constitution, we stood up for what was right, and subsequently, countless numbers of counties, cities, and states followed our good example. So my interest now as a member of Congress, and one of my priorities is to introduce legislation which we're seeking to pass. We just reintroduced it just 3 weeks ago in Congress, a law that we'll talk about later known as a New Way Forward, which seeks to separate, decouple criminal law from immigration law, and of course to do away with the growing cruelty of our immigration system and laws in our country. So that's my motivation and why I am here with folks that are working on the ground to educate, to mobilize, and to advance public policy that's truly in our national interest and in the interest of advancing human rights.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Congressman. And there's a lot to unpack about the intersection between the two systems, and we'll get to that in a few minutes. But I think, you're talking about your personal experience and what you've seen and how that's impacted the kind of organizing work that you've wanted to do. And just like you, Hector Barajas has brought his personal experience to the exceptional organizing work that he's done. Hector is a U.S. Army veteran whose life has been defined by his resilience and his tireless advocacy for deported veterans. He was also born in Mexico, grew up in LA as a lawful permanent resident, and after high school enlisted in the military, where he received several awards, including 2 prestigious medals. And after he was honorably discharged from the military, he faced challenges, as do many military veterans, transitioning back into civilian life. Struggling to readjust, Hector found himself entangled in a regrettable incident that led him to plead guilty to a conviction related to an unlawful discharge of a firearm. After serving his 2-year sentence, paying his debt to society as required by the criminal legal system, he was detained and deported to the U.S., separated from his family, including his daughter, who he mentioned to me emotionally yesterday. Despite these adversities, Hector turned his personal leadership and personal hardship into action. He founded the Deported Veterans Support House, which is an organization that provides housing, social services, legal resources to fellow veterans in similar circumstances. I was privileged to see his work in Tijuana just last year. Hector ultimately received a pardon for his offense from the governor of California, became a U.S. citizen, and was allowed to return. And he continues to advocate for the return of veterans, not only those folks, but also for all who've been unjustly deported. So Hector, I'm so thrilled to have you here. I want to just ask you, after watching our film and seeing Howard's story, what aspects of his deportation and also his return resonate with you? What parts remind you of your own journey?
Sure. So one of the most difficult things for any veteran, or really anybody, is just being separated from your family and all you know. One of the things that the film really didn't talk about, but also like the return home and the obstacles. As I was talking yesterday with you, my daughter turns 18 this year, and we don't even have a good relationship. We're even speaking. So it definitely affects your whole life, and just the return home doesn't. And the nightmare for some of us, some of the fellas do have, PTSD, and women, like Laura Mesa, who just came home recently. So some of us still suffer from, the PTSD and just being reintegrated back into the U.S., just reintegrating back from getting out of the military, now having to come back and figure out how you're going to, find work. But in the military, we have a motto of leaving no man or woman behind, and that's what really pushed me to continue to do this work. And people like your organizations and Congressman Chuy Garcia and Congressman Takano and many others who, veterans have been deported for over 20 years, and through the amazing work and advocacy that we've all done, last year we were able to bring home 80 people, 80 veterans. So thank you guys.
Yeah, and I think Hector is being a bit modest. The initiative he's referring to, IMVETS, was set up by the Biden administration, and as he said, about 80 veterans have returned in the past year. That process builds on pieces of the proposal we've made, but it really builds on 10 years of organizing that the deported veterans movement has been doing, partly from Mexico, partly from Southern California, across many different leaders. And, Hector, you say leave no man or woman behind was what you learned in the military. And, that's the mentality, you've brought, I think, to the organizing work you've done, which we can talk a little bit more about in a few minutes. But thank you for sharing, especially the personal part. It's difficult to talk about every time, but Hector does it over and over to advocate for so many others, and we're so grateful for that. I do want to turn quickly to Alex Rivera, who has also done so much, using his expertise and art form to offer a platform and a way for people like Hector, who've been in this system and up against it, to amplify those experiences and to share it with others so they understand and empathize with this fight. He is an award-winning filmmaker whose work explores themes of migration and globalization. He's won multiple awards for his first feature film, Sleep Dealer, at Sundance and the Berlin International Film Festival. His second film, which I highly recommend, The Infiltrators, which focuses on immigration detention, also received 2 awards at the 2019 Sundance Film Festival. He's a professor at the Sidney Poitier New American Film School and a MacArthur Fellow. But important for today, he worked with NIJC to co-produce the short film you just watched. So Alex, I wanted to ask, why do you use your art form to amplify immigrant experiences? And in particular, why do you think making films like the short one we just watched, which call attention specifically to deportation and detention, are important to this immigrant rights movement?
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be here with everybody. You know, for me, I come from a kind of mixed status family. I have undocumented primos and primas, but I grew up and was born here in the States, and so I have that privilege. But when I decided to become a filmmaker, to me, I started to see immigration as something that wraps around everything in this society, that we kind of live in a society that is something of a caste system, divided and fundamentally unjust. And I don't view immigration as an issue. I view it as a kind of something that wraps around everything. So whether you care about housing, policing, climate, immigration has to be addressed, or else you're dealing with a split consciousness, a kind of unjust frame for everything. And I just, by being close to that system and those experiences, I view it as almost medieval, the amount of pain and suffering that we see in, you know, stories like Vanessa's, or that we hear in Hector's voice. For what? Why? And why do our communities wake up every day and put up with it? I find it like just deeply, deeply unjust and needs attention, and it needs stories, it needs media, because the forces that like the status quo, the forces that created this system, maintain it, and have made a lot of progress in the past few decades. Forces of hatred, forces that benefit from having this caste of workers who are vulnerable, those forces and their media systems have been very effective, and they're winning a battle of story in this society and really on the planet currently. And so as a storyteller, I can't think about making commercials or going to do some other work. This is the urgent thing, is intervening in the realm of story, because how we think about how citizens think about non-citizens, and how immigrants think about ourselves, how we understand our own families. Are we alone? The suffering that we each have in our own families, it's ours, or is it, you know, is it collective? What is the history of it? We need stories that illuminate all of that, and so that to me has seemed absolutely crucial. It's urgent politically, and it's also incredibly rich. We need many, many, many stories about this, this aspect of our humanity, this aspect of our society, because it involves many, many millions of people. And we don't have enough stories that, that look at the immigration question in all of its dimensionality. And so I'm just trying to do what I can. And when I have an opportunity to create something in solidarity with a kind of campaign or a moment like this, well, that's very exciting. And the stories you brought, Nena, to me and my team were just so powerful. And you can make, you know, a dozen powerful films out of them. But here we are, a short film, and hopefully it's a start, you know.
Yeah, it's a wonderful start, thanks to Alex's exceptional talent, you know, sharing stories in these multidimensional ways. Shanat Sobrevilla, who I'm also so excited to have with us, understands the pain of deportation so well because of her exceptional work here in Chicago as a dedicated organizer. She leads the campaign and coalition work at Organized Communities Against Deportations, OCAD. They are a trusted partner of ours at NIJC. They are building a grassroots movement against the criminalization and deportation of immigrants in Chicago and in the surrounding areas. In her work, Shanat spearheads efforts to support anti-deportation campaigns and works tirelessly to prevent deportations so that people aren't in the position as our 10 advocates here who are stuck living in exile trying to come back. So we've talked already a bit about bringing home deported people. Shanath, you're doing a lot right now to prevent and stop deportations. Could you just share with everyone a bit about how you try to do that up against a system like this? What tactics are you using? And maybe if you're willing to share about, one person whose deportation we're trying to stop right now in real time.
Yeah. I'm undocumented myself. I have DACA. I started to get to know young people my age back in the early 2009 in Chicago. We had a friend in removal proceedings. He had an ankle monitor. And it was through the conversations that we realized that the people having the conversations were other undocumented young people. And feeling like that was not going to that cannot be the thing that happened. And so it was conversations, sharing space. I myself thought for many years that I was the only person undocumented and felt very isolated, but seeing others and kind of just, bouncing our feelings and ideas, started to be thinking about how to be more visible. And then feeling stronger, how do we then challenge things that are normalized, or how do we not accept horrible conclusions? And so I remember back then it became a student movement to have our friends stay in the US. In the beginning, we didn't have the support of other organizations or representatives because our friend had been criminalized, and they were justifying his deportation because of a DUI. But it was the visibility and the resistance that we were building, that networks of people saying no, that allowed our friend to stay in Chicago. And realizing that this had been done and driven by other undocumented people just made us realize that let's continue doing it. 2010, I believe, was the first coming out of the shadows, organized way of saying 10 of us, 12 of us publicly our status, and then just seeing what happens around after that. And what we saw was we challenged our fears. We started saying undocumented, unapologetic, unafraid, and we started to grow as a network of young people just thinking, what else can we challenge? And so back then we became the Immigrant Youth Justice League here in Chicago, and other people around the US also started organizing, we were starting to organize in parallel, supporting each other and kind of feeding off each other. And then we started to really focus on deportations. We started to really try to understand how the deportation apparatus came into being, how it functioned. In Chicago, we started seeing how interactions, local police, CPD, often led to deportations. We saw the racism in that criminal legal system, and how that just was being used by immigration to justify their coming into the picture and doing cycles of harm, or perpetuating cycles of harm. In 2013, we decided to just formalize ourselves around deportations, seeing the impact that it had on us, and the tools it gave us to challenge immigration system as a whole. Yeah. And then organizing, supporting people wanting to challenge their deportations publicly. So using all types of tactics at our disposal. Sometimes it was direct actions. There were a couple times, we did attach ourselves to buses with loved ones inside in Illinois. It's been doing rallies outside. Chicago has headquarters for about 6 states. So it makes decisions for around 6 or 7 states.
You mean the Chicago ICE headquarters?
Yes, we have it here in Chicago. And so we're lucky or unfortunate enough to be able to then show up in their building and challenge publicly when we have to and when we can. Today, we continue to see how the criminal legal system impacts our ability to be safe in our sanctuary city in Chicago. And we continue to see people placed in deportations because of it. We have the example of Ana Navarro. I was chatting with her this morning. She's detained in Dodge, which is a detention center in Wisconsin, but she's a Chicagoan since she was 2. When she was little, she was entrusted enough, a teacher, and confided in her that she was being sexually abused. And from there, instead of being supported, she was separated. And this is the reason we believe she qualifies for a U visa. But remember, she's still in detention right now fighting her deportation. Years forward, as a young adult, 16-year-old, she continues to experience abuse. And at that point, she had a 2-year-old that was also experiencing abuse. And instead of being supported as a young person, she was criminalized, arrested, and charged for the abuse of her 2-year-old. That wasn't being inflicted by her, but a partner that was abusing both of them. Ana served 12 years, was released in 2022, November. But soon after February of this year, 2023, ICE tracked her down and has had her in detention ever since. So this is someone that has been through the cycles of harm, the criminal legal system, and now ICE, and we're really fighting for her to be able to be released to her family, her sisters, her community. She's someone that when she was released from Logan, a prison, she was about to enter into a fellowship to help other people, other women, victims of domestic violence. And so, yes, I think it's someone that, even under the ICE memo, should not be targeted. There's already in place policies where it says discretion should be used for people that have experienced what Ana has experienced, and yet that has been requested and ICE has refused. And so we keep pushing and trying to figure out ways to visibilize her story, because Ana is the experience of many people, and trying to support her and being able to be released and free with us.
Yeah, so I mean, first, Shanat, just to say, like, you've been doing these tactics and organizing work for so long. So there are so many in our space who are grateful for that work, but also you're picking up on two threads here. I'm going to turn to the congressman next, but you're talking about the intersection of these two systems, people who have contact with the criminal system and all of the challenges in that system and how that then translates to these extremely harsh consequences. And in the example that you offer of Ana, you know, she is one of many women survivors who've been criminalized, who have survived domestic violence, but nevertheless faced criminal consequences. And there's a whole movement supporting those women in the criminal space and reforms that have happened. And so, Congressman Garcia, just to kind of switch gears a little bit here, you know, we have this system, immigration system, that's deporting military service members, people with old marijuana convictions, survivors of domestic violence who've been criminalized. And of course, everything is quite challenging in our political climate right now, but we have seen improvements in the criminal legal side. We've had reforms on marijuana prosecutions, changes to sentencing lengths, laws passed to help women like Ana on the criminal side, but the road has felt a lot harder for us on the immigration side. We still are using these outdated laws passed in '96, and we're up against a rhetoric on the right that criminalizes our communities. So from where you're sitting, and based on your experiences in Congress, why do you think our system is still this outdated and so unjust? And what are we up against trying to remedy these injustices, and why has it been particularly hard to fix in the immigration realm?
So as an immigrant and someone who lives in the barrio among immigrants and someone who's from a mixed status family as well, I think I understand and live the reality and the frustrations. The frustrations for me of the last 4.5 years have been that I was pretty positive that there would be immigration reform when I arrived in Congress in 2019. We had majorities in both houses, and then as of 2 years ago plus, when we won the White House and Biden was in the White House, I thought for sure that it would happen, but it didn't. Instead, you saw Republicans continue to double down on xenophobic attacks, scapegoating of immigrants, creating a whole narrative about immigrants and drug trafficking. The latest is that the recent arrival of migrants from South America, especially Venezolanos and Cubans and Colombians, that the increase in fentanyl deaths and trafficking is attributable to them as one sensational false story and narrative, right, of what's going on in the country. And that has contributed to the polarization around the debate about immigration reform. And it's very evident that there's a severe labor shortage in the country, that the solution is at hand, and that we ought to help the 11 million, and that we ought to give employment authorization to those that have recently arrived here, so that cities aren't on the lurch for funding and trying to figure out how to make things happen. The problem would largely help solve itself, with, of course, other things happening. But it's this dynamic of Republicans attacking immigrants and then Democrats not being able to deliver. Although we passed 2 bills out of the House in 2 Congresses, the Senate has, of course, not done away with the filibuster, prevented the possibility of immigration reform. So it's that increasing polarization that moves us once again to the back burner and to silence among folks that should be ratcheting the calls for immigration reform forward. So it's been very frustrating. As we look toward the future, it is my hope that if we're to win a House majority in the elections next year, hang on to the Senate and keep the White House, that after that electoral cycle where Donald Trump, and sorry for the lengthy explanation, the hijacking of the Republican Party by Donald Trump will help create conditions where more Republicans who quietly agree that we need immigration reform, that something needs to happen, will be freed up to act their conscience and to act in the public interest of the nation. But it is extremely heartbreaking to hear of all the cases of people being apprehended, placed in deportations proceedings, ripped away from their families and their communities as well. But in my opinion, that is a part of the landscape, and we're left to fight on individual cases, continuously up against this constant barrage and narrative of immigrants and criminalization just continuously.
Yeah, thank you, Congressman. And I'll just say, I mean, I think something I love about our Chance to Come Home campaign is that we're fighting for 10 individual people to come back, but in doing so, we're trying to combat that narrative with their experiences and their stories and their voices that they've been willing, to share and put out there. And I think what you're saying is that we have to think in our tactics, how do we fight for individual people, but also take on this narrative so that we have some power. I want to just stay 1 minute with you very quickly because we are short on time, but it's a dire context, but there's some hope, and you are co-leading the New Way Forward Act, which you mentioned before, which does offer a blueprint on how we can disentangle some of these worst parts of the intersection between the criminal, legal, and immigration system. Would you be willing just to share for like a quick minute, what the vision is behind that bill?
Yes. So New Way Forward, is referred to as the most radical plan in Congress. Some people call it the open borders bill. And I proudly say, no, it's a real solution to the slippage. First of all, our immigration policies and the criminalization is rooted in white supremacy. In the 1920s, a Southern white supremacist senator was the architect of the present laws, and we've only become more harsh in implementing it. But New Way Forward seeks to decouple immigration from criminal law. It seeks to end mandatory detention. Immigration and locking people up shouldn't automatically go hand in hand by any stretch of the imagination. It restricts deportability grounds and who's deemed a bad immigrant, seeks to end this debate about good immigrants and bad immigrants. Damn it, immigrants are good. Are there a few bad apples? Yes, like anywhere else in society. It seeks to restore judicial discretion. Let judges hear cases out. This is what we did in criminal justice reform. This is what people are fighting for all over the country, so that judges can have that discretion, so they can hear the full story of impact on family and community. And lastly, yes, it seeks to end mass incarceration. Just like Bill Clinton was forced to apologize for the crime bill of 1996, apologies are needed, and a recognition and acknowledgement is needed that the bad laws that were passed were also in the realm of immigration, and that better than an apology, we need to correct it. This is how you begin to correct it.
Thank you, Congressman. And just as one added wonderful thing about the New Way Forward Act is that it also includes a provision that offers a remedy to bring people home who've been hit by these old laws, so that when we do have a new blueprint and a new way, we aren't leaving people behind stuck in exile. So I want to turn to you, Hector. We already mentioned this briefly, but we have a proof of concept. We know that even before we get to the point in Congress where we can pass the New Way Forward Act, that this administration can set up processes right now to remedy injustices. That's what Chance to Come Home seeks to do. And the IMVETS process that builds on your work has already started doing that. So I just was hoping you could share with folks a little bit more about the Deported Veterans Support House, but what political efforts you all are making now to support veterans, but also non-veterans who've been deported.
Sure. So one of the bills that was just recently introduced was the Veteran Service Recognition Act by Mark Takano, and it actually passed the Senate. It actually passed.
It's been introduced in the Senate and now in the House as well.
Now in the House,
That's right.
But it actually did pass the Senate, but didn't pass Congress last time.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So hopefully, we'll see what happens this time. But with the MVETS program, it actually reviews it's case by case, unfortunately. But at least some people are coming home. So, but we definitely we would love to see that every veteran that served gets a chance to come home, and really, like in general, like I've seen my whole deportation. When I went through deportation, I thought I was just going to see Mexicans when I was going to go through detention center, and I saw Canadians, Portuguese people, and I saw people that were losing their green card. So it was very impactful to see people ripped apart from their families, and it just doesn't affect veterans. It just a whole broad people, dreamers. So it was just. I'm very, very supportive in general of just supporting our immigrants so they can stay here, they can have a legal pathway, but also bringing people home.
Yeah, thank you, Hector. And our Chance to Come Home 10, none of them are veterans, and Hector has done a lot of work to support their efforts to return. Alex, I want to turn to you quickly. So, the congressman just talked a lot about the right and their narrative, and the anti-immigrant one we're all familiar with. I understand that you combat this with your films and tell these stories in sort of an evergreen, universal way. You mentioned to me that you're working on a new project that tells the story of the first person ever deported by the U.S. government. Would you be willing to share with us briefly a bit about that film and why you think this story in particular could be a powerful way to combat some of this?
Sure. Well, like I mentioned, I think there's just an incredible lack of stories in general, and we need stories set in the present. I made a science fiction set on the U.S.-Mexico border. That's the film Sleep Dealer. But I also think looking at the past, and Representative Garcia mentioned some of the history of the system that in the 1920s that he's working to address in the bill. I've been looking at another time period a bit earlier than that, the 1890s, when deportation began, and of course, course, the word deportation is not in the Constitution. There's actually letters between Jefferson and Madison about banishment, whether we wanted to have a nation that could banish people, and they wrote that they did not. And so it's not in the Constitution for a reason, but in the 1890s, white supremacists who wanted to create an ethnic and racial cleansing regime to expel Chinese immigrants from this country passed the Chinese Exclusion Act and then the Geary Act, creating deportation. And so in 1893 in Manhattan, a man named Fong Yu-ting, who owned a laundry business, walked into the U.S. Marshal's office and said, "I'm here to be deported." He walked in on purpose to create a test case. He was a member of the Chinese Equal Rights League in New York and went to the Supreme Court contesting whether or not deportation could be part of this story. It's a story I learned in the book by Kelly Lytle Hernandez, A City of Inmates, an incredible book I recommend. And the reason I wanted to tell the story is because, to me, the most incredible thing about it is he almost won. He got 3 justices in the Supreme Court. For those of you who know the court's history, you know the Supreme Court in the 1890s is broadly viewed as a racist and backwards court. Most of their decisions have been overturned. But even in that climate, he got 3 of them to say we should have no deportation at all in this country, that it's unconstitutional, unethical, and a violation of our basic principles. And so I'm interested in reviving that story and just in telling it. And it's urgent, I think, that we educate inside of even progressive circles that the immigration system has never been a neutral system about kind of administering who can and can't be here. It's a system that is founded on racism and the impulse to ethnically cleanse. And if you look at the statistics of how it's run since then, that's what it does. And we're 50 million, that's 50 million deportations since then. And so there's really no understanding of the United States without understanding this system, its scope, and its original intent. And you can see all of that in the story of Fong Yu-ting. And so,
Wonderful, yeah, and maybe we'll even get to play it here at Netroots next year when that film is out. Shanat, maybe we'll go to you quickly, and then we can open up for questions with our last few minutes. I just, want to ask, you're in a case-by-case basis trying to combat this criminalized narrative, often on immigrants who have had contact with the criminal legal system. What do you find to be the most challenging about trying to overcome the perceptions that folks have because an immigrant has had contact with that system? And how have you seen success in getting over that hump?
Yeah, I think our years of organizing and supporting each other, challenging removal proceedings, and then doing it in such a public way, learning that there are people, we have each other's back and support. I think the biggest challenge in the beginning was the feeling of shame, kind of exposing your vulnerability as an undocumented person or a person that, had to make very difficult decisions and had to be defying laws to be able to thrive. And I think it's through those conversations about reflections of why do we even have lack of status or borders and talking about extraction. I think those types of conversations and understandings, collective understandings, have also allowed us to have conversations about how criminalization is just the perpetuation of that, of how to control and continue the sense of extraction in our communities in the U.S. And so I think it's through that lens that we also challenge the way we are seen made disposable to justify our deportations. And so I think that lends ourselves to even feel more empowered and powerful as community, defying those systems and making the connections between those systems. As undocumented people, we experience immigration and borders, but also as Black and brown people in the U.S., we experience criminalization through the legal system. And so it's making those connections and seeing how in Illinois and Chicago, we try to make our city accountable for the word sanctuary, which doesn't mean just defy immigration agents in here, but also means let's defy the way CPD targets our communities, our neighborhoods, how our resources are, we are deprived of basic resources. And that lends to difficult situations that then are used to dispose of us, to incarcerate us, to deport us. And so I think it's through that lens of building communities and networks of support amongst each other that allows us to keep defying and seeing people like Ana as like fully beings that need to be given the ability to be free and thrive and supported.
Thank you so much. And, you know, I can say, having met these 10 folks and spent a lot of time with them, that the power in bringing them together and them sharing their stories as folks living with stigma and in exile has been incredibly powerful for all of us who are lucky to be a part of this campaign. Congressman, I'm going to give you the last word before we have maybe a minute for questions. Some of this can be very heavy for any of us in this work. It can feel like there's no hope. You know, what you mentioned 2 years from now. What do you predict the conversation looking like, and where can we have some hope about the needle moving forward?
I think it's really important to keep reminding the White House that the immigrant communities in the critical states that helped us win a majority in the Senate when it was seen as a real long shot happened because of the organizing that took place in immigrant communities. Whether it was Georgia or Arizona or Wisconsin, in Michigan, other places as in Pennsylvania, other places as well. Without that mobilization, it wouldn't have happened. Let us not be forgotten, and let this not be a part of oblivion, especially as we approach 2024. Very, very important. It's time to collect on promises that have been made for such a long time. Two, I do want to give a shout out to folks that helped us come up with the New Way Forward Act. Activists from OCAD, certainly the Immigration, Illinois Coalition for Immigration and Refugee Protection, and a shout out to their passage of Illinois New Way Forward, which does a bunch of good things in the area of not holding, no private prisons in Illinois and holding people there, et cetera. Very, very significant gains. We were involved in helping to bring Miguel Perez home, another deported veteran who became a U.S. citizen. He was my guest at one of the State of the Union addresses as well. And then the case of Johannes Fabi, a Haitian immigrant who was detained at the Kankakee County Jail for over a year. We did a surprise visit to the jail. That's where I met him. We talked for a long time about the carceral system and how immigrants are caught up in that. When he came out, he became a champion for it. Today, he's the deputy director of the Interfaith Commission for Detained Immigrants here in Illinois. So a transformative experience, and someone who is a part of the activist community in our midst. But my hope continues to be that as elusive as immigration reform has been, that after the 2024 election, we've got a new shot. The groundwork needs to be done now. And this, of course, doesn't mean that we will have dismantled the worst elements of our broken immigration system. We've got to continue on the pieces of a new way forward to rid our immigration system of those things and all of its inhumanity and cruelty. So I would say those are two of the large pieces in the realm of immigration.
Thank you so much, Congressman. I do think we're at time, but I'm sure we'd be happy to answer questions after this separately. Thank you for joining us. Please check out our Chance to Come Home website, meet our 10 deported advocates. You can follow us on Twitter, me and my organization, to hear updates on who we're bringing home, the wins we're getting. We're building a lot of support here, and we'd love to have yours. Thank you for joining us. Thank you so, so much to our panelists.